Richard Alexander Murdaugh Jr., Murdaugh. I go by Buster.
Mr. Murdaugh, is your father sitting over here at the defense table?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury a little bit about yourself. Where you born, where you raised, where'd you go to school?
Right. So my name is Buster, 26 years old. I live in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. I was born in Savannah and lived in Beaufort for about 2 years when I was a little child. We moved to Hampton in about 2000, and I grew up in Hampton, went to Wade Hampton High School. And after high school, I went to a small college in Spartanburg called Wofford.
Is your mother Maggie?
Yes, sir.
And your brother Paul?
Yes, sir.
When you moved to Hampton, do you remember how old you were when you first moved to Hampton?
Three or four.
Okay. And did you live in Hampton in a house in the city limits?
Yes, sir.
The town limits?
Yes, sir.
And you did that with your mom and dad and brother for how long?
For around 20 years.
Right. What schools did you go to coming up through in Hampton County? Would you go to grade school?
Went to Ben Hazel Primary School, Hampton Elementary School, North District Middle School, Wade Hampton High School.
Okay. And as you were growing up, what were your interests, Buster?
Sports, playing sports, doing things outdoors, hunting, fishing.
And was your father involved in those interests with you?
Yes, sir.
And was your mother also?
Yes, sir.
And in what way?
Well, my father coached every Little League team I played on up until I started playing for the schools in which had a coach.
And what about Paul? What were his interests growing up?
Paul's interests were outdoors, mostly. Hunting, fishing, playing around in the woods.
Right. Did he also play sports at times?
He did. Yeah, he played basketball and baseball.
Did your dad coach him as well?
He did.
And would your parents attend all of your and Paul's sporting events as you're growing up?
Every game. And it was a rarity for them to miss one, and then if they had to, they would call and explain.
Right. And at some point in time, did your parents buy this property off Moselle Road?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember roughly when that was?
Right around 2012, I think. I would have been a sophomore in high school.
And when that property was first purchased, did you move out to Moselle, or are you still living in Hampton?
So we had a house in Hampton and also purchased the property at Moselle, which had a house. And for the beginning stages of owning Moselle, Hampton was still working as our primary residence. But I believe it was Hurricane Matthew, or one of the hurricanes came through and blew a bunch of pine trees over on the house. So it had to get work done to it. And from that point, we moved out from Hampton to Moselle while the house was getting fixed. And more or less, it just it never transitioned back to Hampton. It just almost like Moselle became the primary residence.
And during this time, did your family also have a house at Edisto?
Yes, sir.
How frequently would you stay at the house at Edisto?
Very frequently during the summertime.
Okay.
Almost every weekend.
And when your family essentially relocated to the Moselle property, making it primary residence, were you still living at home in high school, or remember how old you were at that point in time?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jim. Will you say that again?
Were you living at home at that point in time? Was that while you were still in high school, or
Yes.
school? Do you remember when you transitioned to Moselle and started staying there basically full time during the school year?
So when I was still in high school, we were living in the Hampton house, and then I'd gone off to college.
Okay.
Which is when this stuff happened, and they moved out to Moselle. So yeah, I was living at college.
And when did you go off to college?
2014.
Okay, so sometime after around 2014, family relocated to Moselle for the most part
That's right.
because of the hurricane damage. Is
Yes,
that-
sir.
Okay. What kind of guns did you have there at Moselle?
We had a lot of guns.
Did you have shotguns?
We did shotguns,
Did you have 12 gauge shotguns?
12 gauge shotguns, 20 gauge shotguns, 16 gauge shotguns, 28 gauge shotguns.
Right. And how many type rifles did you have on the property?
A lot.
Can you just name some of them?
Yeah, 270 short mag, 7mm 08, 308, 243, 223, 300 blackout.
And what type of ammo did you keep on the property?
Well, I mean, all ammos for those calibers.
Sure. And where were the guns kept primarily?
In the gun room at the main house at Moselle.
And was there a pool table in the gun room?
There was.
Okay. Were there times when guns were left elsewhere on the property?
Yes.
Where else on the property would guns be left?
Well, just myself. I mean, I've left them up at the shed before. I've left them on golf cart you used that day. Left them in a truck. I mean, guns would just not always find their way back to the gun room.
How about Paul? How was he with securing guns?
Not good.
What do you mean by that?
Paul left guns probably more on the property than anybody else, and sometimes sometimes he would use my gun and then he would leave it, and then I'd have to track it down.
Right. Did Paul carry guns in his truck?
He did.
Would he keep his truck locked up?
No, not all the time.
Did at some point in time you and Paul receive 300 blackouts for Christmas?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember roughly, was that 2016 or 2017?
Sounds right.
Okay. And what color was your 300 blackout?
It was black.
And have you been sitting in this courtroom during the entire trial?
Yes, sir.
And the jury's seen a black 300 blackout. Is that yours?
It is. That is my 300 blackout.
Was that the one you got for Christmas?
Yes, sir.
And what color was Paul's?
Paul's was black and tan.
And when you say black and tan, what part was tan and what part was black?
So the receiver would have been tan, and and barrel would have been tan.
What part would have been black?
Stock, maybe?
Okay. And so yours was all black, his was black and tan.
That's right.
What happened to his that he got for Christmas in 2016?
His gun was apparently stolen, lost, taken. Yeah.
How do you know that?
That's just what Paul told me.
What happened to your gun after Paul's was stolen?
My gun became, what we would both use.
And did that create some confrontation between you two at times?
Yes, sir.
And why?
Well, kind of like I just touched on. So he would use it. He's not very good about putting it back where he found it. I leave it somewhere. I go back and, want to get it, and it's not there.
Did you notice, were you aware that Paul got a replacement at some point in time?
No, sir.
Well, you heard about that in the courtroom?
Yes, sir.
Trial? Okay. But up to that point, did you ever see Paul use the replacement?
No, sir. I've never seen a replacement.
And so every time in your presence Paul was using a 300 blackout, which one would it be?
Mine.
Buster, how often would you speak with your mom and dad on the telephone on a daily basis?
Pretty much every day.
Right. And would you be with your dad when he's talking to your mother?
Yes, sir.
I guess Can you give the jury some sense of how frequently, as a family, y'all would engage in telephone conversations daily?
Yeah, it was very frequent. I mean, I spoke to my mom every day, multiple times a day, and the like for my dad and for my brother too. And that's just me, and I know it's like they're all talking to each other too. Just a lot of conversating throughout the day over the telephones within the family.
Okay. Buster, when did you first find out that your mom and brother were murdered?
My dad called me. I can't remember the exact time, but it was later. And he called me on the phone. He asked me if I was sitting down, and I was like, yeah. And then he, sounded odd, and then he told me that my mom and brother had been shot.
What'd you do?
Well, Brooklyn, my girlfriend, was with me, and I think she heard she could hear my conversation kind of over the phone, and so she just started packing stuff, and I kind of just sat there for a minute, and I was in shock. But eventually we got our stuff together and drove down to Moselle.
Do you remember what time you got to Moselle?
It was early in the morning, late in the morning. If we left around 10:30, 11, got there sometime probably around 2 o'clock in the morning.
And when you got there, did you see your dad?
Yes, sir.
What kind of condition was he in? What was his demeanor?
Yeah, his demeanor was, he was destroyed. He was heartbroken. I walked in the door and saw him and gave him a hug and just broken down.
Could he speak?
Not really.
Was he crying?
Yes, sir.
Who else was in the house? Do you remember?
Yeah. My girlfriend Brooklyn and I got there. Out in the driveway, my Uncle Randy and Uncle John were out there. Chris Wilson and Corey Fleming had just gotten there. They had pulled in behind us, and when I walked in, several of the partners were there. Ronnie Crosby was there, Lee Cope was there, Mark Ball was there, Austin Crosby was there, William Barnes, my buddy Nolan was there. And I'm sure I'm leaving some out, but that's
sure
what I remember.
And do you remember how long you stayed there?
Stayed there several hours, probably 3 or 4 hours, till about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
And where did you go?
And then we left Moselle and we went to Alameda.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
My girlfriend, my dad, and my Uncle John.
What happens when a dynasty falls and the world moves on? When the courtrooms empty, the headlines fade, and the name that once opened every door becomes something people whisper instead. We talk about verdicts. We talk about guilt. We talk about crimes. But we rarely talk about what comes after. Because when a powerful family collapses, the story doesn't end with a sentence. Sometimes, the most complicated chapter belongs to the person left behind. This is not a recap of the murders. This is not another timeline of evidence or courtroom drama. This is about Buster Murdaugh, a man who was not convicted of a crime, yet inherited the full weight of one of America's most notorious family collapses. What does life look like when your last name becomes a headline? When your past is dissected online, and your future is shaped by something you didn't choose? Tonight, we're stepping away from the crime itself and into the aftermath. The quiet fallout, the public suspicion, the invisible sentence that doesn't come with an appeal. This is the story of living in the shadow of a fallen dynasty. This is Buster Murdaugh, living with the fallout of America's most notorious dynasty. Welcome to Dark Crime Casefiles, where no crime stays in the dark. To understand the weight Buster Murdaugh lives with today, we need to briefly understand the world he came from. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh name carried power across South Carolina's Lowcountry. 3 generations of the family served as chief prosecutors, known locally as solicitors, controlling one of the region's most influential legal offices. In small towns where the justice system moves slowly and relationships matter, the Murdaughs weren't just lawyers. They were the system. Their influence extended beyond courtrooms, into law enforcement, politics, business, and social life. The family's wealth grew. Their reputation hardened. And for decades, their name was synonymous with authority. At the center of the modern dynasty was Alex Murdaugh, a well-known attorney, a community figure, and a man trusted by clients, colleagues, and judges alike. His wife, Maggie Murdaugh, lived largely out of the public spotlight. Their two sons, Paul and Buster, grew up surrounded by privilege, protection, and expectations few families ever experience. But beneath that image, cracks were already forming. By the late 2010s, civil lawsuits, financial irregularities, and quiet rumors were beginning to surface, long before the case that would draw national attention. Then, on the night of June 7, 2021, everything changed. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were found dead on the family's rural estate.
Central 717 scene is secured. Got a Whiskey Fox, Whiskey Mike, both gunshot wounds to the head.
Sir, I wanted to let you know because of the scene, I did go get a gun and bring it down here.
It's in your vehicle? Do you have any guns on you at all?
No, sir. It's leaning up against the side of my car.
Okay. You're fine, man. You're fine. Turn around for me.
I don't have any guns.
Okay. Yes, sir. I see that. Okay. This is your wife and son?
And son.
Okay.
It's bad. It's bad. Check the pulses.
Yes, sir. This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I went and got. This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
He's been getting like punched. I know that's what it is.
Okay. When did you get home? Right when you called, or did you go to the house first? Where is the house?
I came to the house first. My mom has late stages Alzheimer's, and my dad is in the hospital.
Okay.
I left. I don't know what time. I can go back on my phone and tell you the exact times. Did you check?
Okay. Did I check what?
Did you check them?
We got medical guys that are that's what they're gonna do. Okay.
What are they doing? Can they hurry?
They are. Yes, sir. That gentleman that was out here already, he's one of the battalion chiefs. Okay. How did you pull up? You from back there?
I went to the house and they weren't home, which was odd. I tried to call.
Okay.
And then I knew they had been down here before I left to go to my mom's.
Okay.
And so that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it. But
Is this the only firearm with you?
Sir.
This is the only one, or is there any more in the truck?
I believe that's it.
You think that's the only one? Okay.
I'm 99%.
Do you normally
certain that's
have
right.
any other firearms in your vehicle?
I don't, but
Okay.
occasionally there's a pistol in there.
Okay. Just wait right here for me for a second, okay?
Central House.
Copy.
Kill your front lights, I can't see. Six, 5, 3, out, 7. Enjoy it, sir. Yeah, well, I've already spoken with Captain Deal. He's got crime scene. He's contacted them. He's also going to give us the assistance of a couple of field agents. Roger that.
You can check them. They're
8 to
dead
10 out.
on it. They are dead on
I
it.
just turn on those.
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Randy. He's taller than Where are you now?
What followed was one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in modern American history, ending with Alex Murdaugh's conviction and life sentence. That story has been told exhaustively.
I am so sorry that I let you down. I am so sorry that I have not been able to be with you. During such hard times. I am so sorry that I did so many things that are so contradictory to every single thing Mom and I ever taught you. And Paul, I am so sorry. I am so very sorry that the things that I did and that I am pleading guilty to here today have somehow caused some people, especially people on social media, and some people in the media, to somehow believe that based on the things that I did, that it is somehow okay to make false, baseless, unsubstantiated claims against you that are not only based on no facts and no evidence whatsoever, but are also not based on any semblance of reality whatsoever. And I am so sorry that you have had to go through that. I know, Buster, that you know that I have always been proud of you. I have never been more proud of you than I am for the way that you have handled all of the adversity that I put on you. Your whole family is proud of you. Mom is proud of you, and Papa is proud of you. I see in letters, emails, and messages that people give to my attorneys how impressed people are with the way that you have carried yourself through all of this. I want you to remember that rational, reasonable thinking people never make as much noise as haters do. I want you to continue to tune them out and continue to be the bigger person as you have this whole time. I want you to continue to stay positive and stay the course. I love you so much, and I am so proud of you.
But this documentary is not about relitigating the crime. Because when the dynasty collapsed, when the legal legacy imploded, and when the public turned its gaze elsewhere, one person remained. A son. A survivor. A man forced to live in the long shadow of a name the world now associates with scandal, suspicion, and loss. And that's where this story truly begins. Before the headlines, before the courtrooms, before the name Murdaugh became shorthand for scandal, Buster Murdaugh lived a life that, from the outside, looked protected. He was born into a family where doors opened automatically, not just because of wealth, but because of legacy. In the Lowcountry, being a Murdaugh didn't just mean privilege. It meant expectation. From an early age, Buster grew up surrounded by law, not as an abstract concept, but as a family inheritance. Courtrooms weren't intimidating places. They were familiar. Family territory. The adults around him were attorneys, judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers, many of whom had known the Murdaugh name long before Buster was born. It was a world where mistakes could be smoothed over, where influence often arrived before consequences, and where the family name carried an unspoken promise of protection. But with that privilege came pressure. Buster was the older son, the one quietly assumed to carry the family forward. Not necessarily through public ambition, but through continuity. In families like this, legacy isn't always spoken aloud. It's understood. You don't just represent yourself. You represent the name. Friends, teachers, and peers knew who he was, and more importantly, whose son he was. That identity followed him everywhere. At school. In social spaces. In moments that should have been private. And like many children raised in powerful families, Buster lived in a carefully controlled bubble. A bubble where problems were handled internally. Where reputations mattered. Where silence was often mistaken for stability. By the time he reached adulthood, the expectations were already in place, whether he chose them or not. But what's important to understand is this. None of this prepared him for what was coming. Because the privileges that once insulated the family would soon become the very reason their downfall was so public and so unforgiving. And when the structure finally collapsed, it wouldn't fall evenly. Some would face courts and sentences. Others would face something harder to define. A lifetime of association, scrutiny, and loss without the clarity of a verdict. To understand how Buster became the last one standing, we need to examine the first fractures, the moments when the image of perfection began to crack, long before the world was watching. The first fractures didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. They arrived quietly, buried in paperwork, whispers, and decisions made behind closed doors. By the late 2010s, the image surrounding the Murdaugh family was still largely intact, at least on the surface. The name still carried weight. The connections still worked. And the lifestyle remained untouched. But inside the system that had protected them for generations, pressure was building. Civil lawsuits began to circle closer. Financial questions started appearing where trust had once been automatic. And people who had relied on the Murdaughs, clients, employees, even friends, began noticing inconsistencies that no amount of influence could fully explain away. Money that should have been there wasn't. Settlements that were supposed to bring relief instead brought confusion. And behind the scenes, the machinery that once ran smoothly began to grind. For Buster, these changes weren't announced. They weren't explained. They simply became part of the background. An atmosphere of tension replacing what had once felt permanent. Families like the Murdaughs are skilled at managing appearances. Problems are compartmentalized. Concerns are handled internally. And questions are discouraged, not answered. So while legal filings grew thicker and phone calls more urgent, daily life continued, at least outwardly. But one event shattered that illusion entirely. In 2019, a late-night boat crash involving Paul Murdaugh claimed the life of a young woman named Mallory Beach. The incident immediately drew public attention, not only because of the tragedy itself, but because of what followed. Questions emerged about accountability, about influence, about whether the rules applied equally when a powerful name was involved. Civil lawsuits followed. Depositions were scheduled. And for the first time, the Murdaugh family found themselves under a spotlight they didn't control. For Buster, this moment marked a turning point. The family name, once a shield, began attracting scrutiny instead of protection. Private matters became public record, and conversations that once stayed inside the family now unfolded in courtrooms and news reports. What few people realized at the time was that this crash did more than spark legal action. It opened doors. Doors into financial records, into internal operations, into a system that had gone largely unquestioned for decades. As pressure mounted, the weight didn't fall evenly. Some members of the family were pulled directly into legal battles. Others were forced into a quieter role, watching, waiting, and absorbing the consequences without ever standing trial. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the idea of permanence began to disappear. The dynasty was no longer unshakable. The future was no longer predictable. And the name that once guaranteed stability now carried uncertainty instead. For Buster, this wasn't yet the collapse, but it was the moment the ground shifted beneath his feet. Because once the system started looking inward, it didn't stop. And what came next would not only dismantle a legacy, it would redefine what it meant to carry the Murdaugh name at all. The moment it finally broke didn't arrive with warning. It arrived with silence. On the night of June 7, 2021, the pressure that had been building quietly for years collapsed inward all at once. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were found dead on the family's rural estate, a place that had long symbolized privacy, control, and insulation from the outside world. By morning, that insulation was gone. Law enforcement arrived. The media followed. And within hours, the story escaped the Lowcountry and spread nationwide. For the public, this was the beginning. For the Murdaugh family, it was the end of anything resembling normalcy. From that point forward, nothing was handled privately. Every movement was scrutinized. Every statement analyzed. Every silence interpreted. And for Buster, the shift was immediate. Grief did not happen in isolation. There was no space to mourn without cameras. No opportunity to process loss without speculation following close behind. In moments like these, the legal system moves carefully, methodically, but public opinion does not. It rushes ahead, filling gaps with assumptions and theories long before facts can catch up. The investigation widened quickly. Financial records once buried in civil cases were re-examined through a criminal lens. Old files were reopened. Patterns that had once seemed unrelated were now viewed as interconnected pieces of a much larger picture. As scrutiny intensified, the family's internal world collapsed outward. Relationships strained under pressure. Former allies distanced themselves. Institutions that once deferred began protecting themselves instead. And slowly, the narrative shifted. This was no longer just a tragedy. It was a reckoning. When Alex Murdaugh was eventually charged and later convicted for the murders, the verdict marked a legal conclusion, but not an emotional one. Justice, in the courtroom sense, had been delivered. But outside those walls, consequences continued to unfold. Because convictions answer what happened. They don't answer how the aftermath is lived. For Buster, the trial didn't bring closure. It brought permanence. The association became fixed. The name became inseparable from the story. And the possibility of anonymity, once taken for granted, disappeared completely. He was not charged. He was not convicted. Yet his life was now tethered to a case that would be analyzed, debated, and revisited for decades. And unlike those inside prison walls, there was no sentence length to count down. No release date. No clean line between punishment and freedom. Only continuity. Because when a family's collapse becomes cultural memory, the people left behind don't just survive the event. They live inside it. And as the legal dust settled, another, quieter reality emerged. One defined not by court filings or verdicts, but by the long-term cost of public association with a fallen dynasty. That cost wouldn't be paid all at once. It would be paid slowly, in reputation, in opportunity, and in the constant reminder that some legacies never fully release those who inherit them. The post-trial world was quieter, but heavier. When the verdict was read and the courtroom emptied, the cameras eventually packed up and moved on. The public found new stories. New trials. New scandals. But for Buster, nothing reset. There was no moment where life returned to normal, because normal no longer existed. The collapse of the Murdaugh dynasty didn't end with a sentence. It lingered, settling into everyday moments in ways that were harder to see but impossible to escape. Simple things changed. Introductions became complicated. Silence became intentional. And distance, from places, from people, from the past, became a form of self-preservation. In the aftermath, Buster was no longer just a private individual navigating grief. He became a symbol, fairly or not, of a fallen empire. Every public appearance invited interpretation. Every absence sparked speculation. And every attempt at rebuilding was measured against a history he did not create but could not outrun. The internet, unlike the courtroom, never adjourns. Online forums dissected family photos. Comment sections filled with theories. Silence was read as strategy. Speech was read as calculation. In a digital age, association becomes evidence, and context is often optional. What gets lost in that noise is something quieter and far more human. The reality is that living under permanent suspicion, without charges, without convictions, creates its own form of confinement. Not legal, not physical, but social. Opportunities narrow. Relationships become cautious. And trust, once broken by proximity alone, takes far longer to rebuild. For Buster, the path forward was never about clearing a name in court. There was no case to fight. No verdict to overturn. Instead, it was about learning how to exist alongside a story that would never fully release him. A story people believed they understood, even when they had never met him. And that is the part rarely explored. Because true crime often focuses on events, on timelines, on guilt and innocence. But it rarely asks what happens to the people who live in the aftermath, the ones who didn't commit the crime, but inherit the consequences. In this case, the legacy wasn't just legal. It was psychological, cultural, permanent. The Murdaugh name had once opened doors without effort. Now, it closed them just as easily. And rebuilding in that reality requires something few people ever have to summon. A life constructed not on redemption, but on endurance. Because some stories don't end. They simply change shape. And for those left behind, the challenge isn't escaping the past. It's learning how to live with it. The longer this story lingers, the clearer one truth becomes. This was never only about a family. It was about what happens when power goes unquestioned for too long. When reputation replaces oversight. When a name becomes so familiar that accountability quietly steps aside. For decades, the Murdaugh dynasty existed inside a system that trusted itself. A system that assumed integrity because it had always done so before. And like many systems built on tradition rather than transparency, it didn't fail all at once. It failed slowly, then publicly, then irreversibly. What remains now is not just a cautionary tale of crime or corruption, but a lesson in how legacy works, and how it can turn from inheritance into burden. For Buster, the legacy wasn't something he chose. It wasn't built by his hands. And it wasn't undone by his actions. Yet it shapes his life all the same. That is the part true crime rarely sits with long enough. The reality is that justice, even when served, doesn't neatly restore the lives caught in its wake. That some consequences exist outside courtrooms, permanent, informal, and unappealable. The Murdaugh story reminds us that power can protect for a time. But when it collapses outward, touching everyone nearby. It reminds us that proximity to wrongdoing can carry a cost even in the absence of guilt, and that public judgment often moves faster than truth and lingers longer than facts. Most of all, it challenges us to think differently about the aftermath, about the people left standing when the spectacle ends, about how society decides who is allowed to move on and who is not. Because while headlines focus on the fall, real life continues quietly afterward. Lives are rebuilt slowly. Identities are reshaped cautiously. And the past becomes something you don't outrun, you learn to carry. This story doesn't ask for sympathy. It asks for perspective. And if there's one lesson worth taking from the ruins of a powerful dynasty, It's this: unchecked influence always leaves a trail. And when it finally breaks, the damage doesn't stop at the center. It ripples outward, into families, into communities, and into lives forever marked by association. If you value true crime stories told with depth, care, and context, not speculation, consider subscribing to Dark Crime Casefiles. Your support helps this channel continue producing thoughtful, well-researched documentaries like this one. Because here, no crime stays in the dark,